Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
Hello, it is Monday, December 9th. How are you? Are you feeling better? Are you feeling better? Hang on to that, okay? For as long as you possibly can. I hope you did something over the weekend that brought you joy. I did a lot of sleeping. That always brings me joy. I know. Take your own advice, Joan. I hope you're feeling pretty good about the week. Let's face it, we have to be here regardless, right? So let's just look at the good news. Man, oh man, interesting, timely conversation that I had last week, you think, with the expert that we talked to on Iran, Behnam Ben Taleblu. And we were talking about Syria, and he talked about how it was in the best interest of the Russian government to keep Syria propped up because that's their access, their port access through Syria. And that was going to be really important to Iran and to Russia to keep Syria under Assad. Well, that didn't happen. That did not happen. The rebels, we were talking with him about how the rebels had taken over a couple of cities. Well, the rest of the country fell. And Assad and his family got out ahead of time. And guess where they went? Okay, I give you 3 guesses. They went to Russia. They are currently being given asylum for humanitarian reasons. That's what the Russian media is reporting. It's humanitarian. So that's going to be really interesting to see how it shakes out. You know, I want to share with you a little bit about what Behnam Ben Taleblu said last week. He talked about, this, even though Assad knew that rebels were getting closer, he apparently, along with other people, were very surprised at the collapse of his military. But Behnam Ben Taleblu said that the Syrian military was very poorly trained, very poorly outfitted, not exactly a crack military force. But the melting away of support and protection and defense of the gentleman and his family, that caught everybody over the weekend by surprise. Now, I'm not saying it's something that we should be celebrating in the street because, frankly, exactly who these rebels are and who's behind them is a bit of a question, and it might be a coalition of several different groups, one of which may be ISIS. So it's not exactly like this was the overthrow of a dictator to replace said dictator with democracy. So the State Department is taking kind of a wait and see on this. But Behnam Ben Taleblu talked about this, what a melting away like this would mean. I want to share this little clip from our discussion last Thursday with you right now.
As it relates to Assad's forces, I think it's just a classic command and control issue. One might say, wouldn't the fear of a group like HTS, Harakat Tahrir al-Sham, coming at you inspire you to fight against them even further? But for places where the troop morale is low, where this was seemingly unexpected, where training is poor, and in general troop discipline is low, faced with a surprise offensive or really an operation that has both breadth and depth. These kind of tactics, melting away, retreating in a rather disorganized fashion, putting up limited bouts of resistance, are not uncommon. And so I think the Assad regime is ceding territory. They are regrouping. They are desperate for their international partners like the Iranians and the Russians to muster support. There's already allegations that the Russians would be using some of their proxy forces in Syria, potentially some of the Africa Corps. We know Wagner, for example, the other group, had already been in Syria in the past. We know that via the Iranians, via social media, the Afghan brigade that the Iranians created to help bail out Assad in the past, the Fatimiyun were present and are being called up again. We know that from public reporting, the Iran-backed militias in Iraq, which occupy a critical border between Iraq and Syria, have crossed that border as part of the larger fight to save the Assad regime. And so the million-dollar question will be, given Israel's military successes against Hezbollah, and given the fact that Hezbollah played such a crucial role as part of the connective tissue in this axis of resistance to save Assad in the past when they intervened militarily in that Syrian civil war starting in 2013, will Lebanese Hezbollah be able to, after the beating that's taken from the Israelis, be able to once again cross over and once again work on behalf of Iran to bail out the Assad regime in Damascus?
Apparently there will be no bailing out unless they're playing the long game and Putin is going to keep Assad and his family in Russia in the hopes that whatever effort this is and whoever is behind it will find that they can't be organized enough to form a government and that maybe there's some chaos and disarray, and maybe, just maybe that gives Assad an opportunity to return. You know, Vladimir Putin is famous for playing the long game. You know, to wit that when you make him angry, you know, he will come after you, but not necessarily right away. He may come after you days, weeks, years later, and then suddenly there's nerve gas and suddenly you're in the hospital. So we shall see. By the way, this week we are doing what we have been doing, and I want you to get used to it. It's our new policy. The first hour, we are going to be talking about the news of the day. We are going to be talking about what you think is important, your observations on what's going on. So let's get those phone lines open. Paul Shivari is back at the studio, eagerly awaiting your phone calls. 773-763-9278. If you've never called in before, an easy way to remember it is 773-763-WCPT. Just, you know, those little letters. Put those on your phone. 773-763-9278. You can call me on that line. You can text me on that line. And we will be taking your calls. Let's take a real quick break right now, and we'll get to it right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We are spending the first hour taking your calls, talking about the news of the day. I already talked about how over the weekend the rebel siege in Syria has turned into a coup, has turned into the toppling of the Assad regime. So there you go. Let's go to the phone lines now. Our good friend Bobby is on the line from Indiana. Hey, Bobby, how are you?
Well, I hope Assad has got a good health plan under Trump. I found out an interesting thing about my health plan under the new Hoosier Pathways system, and I am under Bang 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 United Healthcare is what I got signed up with. And I got my first statement the other day in the mail. And it said, claim denied.
Oh, no. Hey, Bobby, I was going to download this. We both need to do this. ProPublica apparently posted a link, and the link takes you to the official form that you submit to find out why a claim has been denied. There is actually an official form they need to consider, and I was going to go to ProPublica myself and download it, but I just actually had a claim denied myself, so I was more than eager to figure out what to do.
Well, without a computer, and I don't know how to use one of them.
But you can do it at the library. You could go to your local library and download the form and print it out there.
I'd have to have them do it.
Oh, they're really helpful. If you don't know how to do that, I love libraries. They're just so helpful. They would walk you through it. I know they would.
Well, guess how much the claim was for?
How much?
$100.
The one they denied for me was $35. After I had my foot surgery, as I was in recovery, they put this special shoe on my foot because I wasn't supposed to bend it. And apparently, nobody told me that shoe was not covered. So I'm now paying for the shoe, at least until I can talk to the insurance people.
Tell them you want a steel-toed one because you know where to put it.
Heck, if I'd have known I was paying for it by myself, I would have gotten a boot. Go all the way. Get a boot.
Yeah, these people are good for nothing. I mean, my Part D drug. Every month I get a statement of all my medications, and they have never once. It shows what you paid out of pocket, what your extra help paid, and then what the plan pays. The plan has never paid a friggin' red cent. It's hilarious. But I suppose you heard the other good news of the day.
Which is?
Our dearly beloved man of the people, Elon.
Yeah, what?
He is going to, as he so kindly put it, tear Social Security out by the roots.
Oh yeah.
And that it's time. I might get this off a little bit, but basically I'm right. It's time for a war on the poor. Isn't that sweet? Isn't that lovely?
Did he actually say war on the poor?
Yes, apparently so. And even if he didn't, that's what he's doing, because right now I am running underwater month to month. And if I don't get some kind of cost of living increase, I'm going to be hurting real good this coming year, when I am going to be getting a rent increase. And if I get any kind of cut, I almost pulled the plug middle of last week. I was that close. And before I'm going to let those SOBs take me out, I'm going to do it myself. I'm not going to give them the pleasure. I've had
Bobby.
all of it. I've had it with the whole friggin' mess. But my God, what if other people, not just in my shape, I'm blowing the horn, but I want you to know I'm using myself to cover millions of people, and frighteningly, I must say, a good many of that million are in far worse shape than I am.
No.
So you know what that's going to amount to. And from what I can understand about our dearly beloved Democrats, they say that, well, let them go ahead and do that, because then in 2 years, we'll come back with a vengeance. Well, first off, they should know that's not going to happen, because during this last election, people didn't have enough sense to get out of their own way and stop this. And secondly, people like me aren't going to be around to vote for them. So that the margin's going to be even slimmer, so they can dream about in 2 years all they want. I don't have no 2 years to dream with anymore. It's over. The game is over for this kid. So I say, if you can afford to fight, if you got something to fall back on, but for many of us, there's, we've...
Bobby, can I make a suggestion before you decide to just give up? Find out, contact your state rep or your state senator and find out if they will help you find resources. I mean, that's what their job is. That's constituent services. That's the kind of thing that they should be able to help with. So don't go down without a fight, my friend. Don't go down without a fight.
Fight's out of me, Joni. I'm too old, too sick, and too broke already.
Oh, Bobby.
I don't know. Right now, I have to wait to see exactly where the big shoe drops, and then I might make one last bitch call to some of these people.
You got nothing to lose.
Here are the facts and figures. If you want to, I know people not to call.
Yeah, really.
But right now, I'm not making any long range plans because I think they're making plans for me.
They're making plans for all of us. But, I don't think of all the people we need to worry about, I don't really think Elon. I think Elon is, first of all, he's admitted to being like, what do they call that? Bipolar. And I think...
Well, I'm bipolar. I'm bipolar.
I think that Elon is going to get tired of this new government role. I think once he tries to actually do something, he's going to find there's a lot of pushback. It's not going to be like when he goes to Tesla and he's got this hand-picked corporate board and he says, yeah, you guys should pay me 10 times what you're already paying me. And the board goes, okay, Elon, we'll do that. I think he's going to find government is a little bit of a different entity. And I think he's going to get bored and I think he's going to lose interest. And I'm more worried about Tulsi Gabbard giving all of our secrets to the Russians.
Yeah, well, there's a whole nest of what over there. But right now, about the only thing I can grasp that may be out there because he's doing things is that there was an old Army saying that my dad and others had. Biden on the way out the door may be planning on crapping in Elon's mess kit in some way that could maybe crimp his style with this plan. So, that's yet maybe out there.
Yeah. Bobby, thank you for the call. What you just said reminded me of something that I saw on social media. New York Times asked a bunch of people who contribute to their editorials, editorial contributors. They asked like half a dozen of them or 7 of them what they think Joe Biden should do with his remaining time. Paul, why don't you play that right now?
Hi, President Biden.
Hi, President Biden.
I have an idea.
You've less than 3 months in office, and I want to make a pitch to you.
You still do have time and the power to pardon all Americans with a federal conviction for nonviolent marijuana-related crimes.
You still have time to protect immigrants from the immediate threat of mass deportation. Please use your legal authority to expand temporary protected status for people from Nicaragua, Ecuador, and Venezuela.
In the name of racial reconciliation and equal justice, we respectfully ask you to commute all federal death sentences to life.
Many of our kids in the rural South are under Title I protection, so I want you to do everything you can to protect the most marginal in America.
Reject these dirty LNG facilities that are just going to pump so much pollution into everyday Americans' backyards.
Please use your executive powers to grant a merciful clemency to Native American activist Leonard Peltier. He has spent the last 50 years in federal prison. He should be allowed to die surrounded by his family, and in so doing, provide a sense of justice and closure to American Indian people.
President Biden, help the 14 state-run Climate Corps programs prepare for a future without federal support.
Please, President Biden, exert greater pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel to show restraint in Gaza using American leverage, which is the transfer of American weapons that are used in Gaza.
Invite the survivors of the U.S. atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to the White House. As the threat of nuclear weapons is on the rise, you can put a spotlight on the horrible consequences.
Use these final weeks in office to create a men's mental health task force and launch a national campaign to tackle this stigma.
Create a position in the White House for a special advisor to the president for music arts and cultural initiatives. This could be a precursor for an eventual cabinet-level position. We are the only major country in the world not to have such a position.
There are 17 nominees awaiting confirmation to the federal bench. See that these qualified, well-deserving nominees become federal judges.
Communicate to the American people how essential the Affordable Care Act is for all of us. Also, that it's the same thing as Obamacare.
Come to the West. The idea of a sitting president speaking at the base of, say, the Tetons would be incredibly impactful for those of us in the West. If you could also return power to those of us who are closest to these natural resources and who know best how to manage them, that'd be great.
Move quickly and effectively to forgive as many loans as you possibly can.
Please finalize the proposed rules expanding access to birth control and conclude any investigations into hospitals that have failed to provide emergency abortion care.
It's been another terrible year for all the people who are affected by the armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But I also saw the true difference that the humanitarian assistance that you have been supporting can make in frontline towns and villages. And I hope it will remain a priority while you are in office.
Take executive action to ban gay conversion therapy in all 50 states, and to give a major address about why this fake pseudoscience is so harmful to LGBTQ Americans.
Hey, President Biden, I don't need an executive action from you, but if you could just step down so we can have a female president for a few weeks, that'd be great. Thanks.
Again, those are members of the New York Times editorial board. Thank you, Bobby, for reminding me about that. We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We spend the first hour of every day taking your calls, talking about the news of the day. Let's go to our good friend Dave, who's calling in from Hoffman Estates. Hey, Dave, how are you?
Hey, Joan. Yeah, told Paul talking about that shooter, that Mangione, and that was. Hey, that's that. He got ID'd by a worker at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania.
So they say.
Now, that at least the person of interest, but he got caught with the goods and that pretty much. But, that if it turns out then that it is him, because that they say it's a ghost gun, in other words, one of them 3D guns, and if ballistics don't match up, that's then what? But I guess they found clothes and that. But if everything goes like they're hoping it will go, I think New York or whoever put up that reward money ought to share that money between that woman that worked that desk at that hostel that got him to pull his mask down. Because he was flirting with her, and she wanted to see his face because she couldn't see his face, and that's when they got the kind of the facial ID. Otherwise, New York cops, nobody had no clue where this guy was. He went on that bike and all of that stuff. And
but they also had a picture of his face from Starbucks. It's really weird. Some things, if this indeed turns out to be the guy, some things he did like an absolute pro, and some things he did, it's almost like he wanted to get caught. I mean, he's had all this time, and he didn't get rid of the gun, and he didn't get rid of his clothes, and he was caught with some sort of manifesto. I don't know. It's really bizarre. Very bizarre.
But it seems like that woman and that McDonald's worker should split the reward between the two of them, and that's my thing. And with that CEO and that, they've had these other ones after that were scrubbing their profiles and stuff off of online. Because I'm trying to figure out how he knew when, unless this guy seems to be pretty brilliant with the computer, unless he already seen and they might have posted something that so-and-so is going to be speaking at this hotel, And,
the one thing that bothers me about this, you get the murder of a high-profile, rich, white guy, and it's like suddenly every resource available to every law enforcement agency across the country is brought to focus. How many murders occur in New York? Hell, in New York City alone. Do they get this kind of attention? Or is it only the high-profile, rich white guys? Oh, my goodness, he's a CEO and he got shot. This is, I think, one thing that really bothers me is this two-tiered justice system that we seem to have. Now, admittedly, this case is getting a lot of attention on television, and part of the reason I think there's so much effort is people in the New York City cops, they don't want to look like idiots here. They want to look like they're really good at their job. And so maybe it's just the question. But even then, why is the media so obsessed with this? I was watching CNN for a little bit for the last several days. CNN has devoted more airtime to this shooting than it seems like any other story I've seen them report. They're obsessed with it. Ooh, it isn't, usually they like when little blonde, blue-eyed girls get murdered. That's a big thing with CNN. But this'll do, a rich, powerful white guy on the streets of New York City. And, it just really reminds you that, who else? Dave, if you got shot in New York City, trust me, I think you're a wonderful human being, but your murder would not get this kind of attention, nor would mine.
Well, talk about CNN, you remember way back when that was in Texas or something, where that little girl fell down in that well or whatever at that time?
Yeah.
And as you know, being in the news business, that, like you said earlier about those killings and all of that, well, didn't they used to have the old adage, if it bleeds, it leads? Yeah.
Here's the other thing, the fact that there's so much media based in New York City. Even this guy, even this powerful, rich white guy, if he had gotten shot on the streets of some backwoods town in Nebraska, this would not be a story that CNN would be so obsessed with. When something happens, as the news media says, in our own backyard, it just seems to give everybody the green light to jump on it.
Yeah. With that shooting, I don't know. I'm ambivalent in some ways on it because of the fact that this guy, when he denied and all of these, how many people died because of his denials?
Yep. Something like 32%. He was very proud of the fact that 32% of claims were denied.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, I hate to be I think this is kind of weird. How much you want to bet if this guy that they've found actually gets charged? I predict somebody's going to start a GoFundMe for his legal defense.
Yeah, that's what Hartman had said, too. And, well, look at it this way. If you got a lot of money, you can murder somebody. Just ask OJ, you know? So
there you go.
But anywho, I don't know. Like I say, like the comedian Chris Rock one time talked about mentioning OJ. He said, I couldn't do this, but he says, I understand. So that's the way I understand, you know, because that manifesto, he was talking about how, you know, didn't he have a grandmother or some loved one that died because they denied the stuff, and that's kind of what they figured kind of triggered him. Then he worked at a retirement home and stuff. And
I don't know. I don't know any of the background. Dave, sounds like you're much better informed on this than me. But let's see how this shakes out.
Yeah. Hey, in closing, like when talking about Syria, that was President Obama's Waterloo too, if I recall right. Remember with
there was. I remember
the red line. If you don't cross the, you know,
when this all happened in Syria. There was talk about whether or not the United States should have a military presence, and President Obama did what presidents are supposed to do. Rather than just sending off the military, he went to Congress to ask for authorization to take military action in Syria, and the Congress voted it down. So whenever anybody out there, you hear talk about how Obama really blew this, he should have, you know, had military action. He wanted to. He went through the proper channels. He asked for congressional approval, which is how a president is supposed to behave. And the Congress said no. So that's another thing that drives me crazy. Anyway, Dave.
Thanks, Joan, for taking the call.
Thanks for the call. Let's go to our back to the phone lines. Our good friend Steve from the Gold Coast is on the line. Hello, Steve.
Hello there. So, and I think you're right with regard to, you know, the media sort of picks and chooses what it's going to cover. And let's keep in mind that there's a huge class dimension to this. So, you know, someone poor in some high-crime neighborhood gets shot, especially if they have a criminal history or they're somebody who didn't do much with their life, then that's not much of a story. It's in some circles, it's called a misdemeanor homicide, a misdemeanor murder, because that's how much attention gets paid to it. But here you have somebody who's supposed to be part of the elite. So, you know, the idea is that, well, if somebody who's this successful, this wealthy can be killed, then, oh, my God, we have to make sure we solve it. Not so much to defend people like me and you, but to make sure that the people at the top can walk the streets of New York. Because in this country, you can walk around in Los Angeles, you know, on Rodeo Drive. You can walk around on Fifth Avenue and Michigan Avenue, and you can have huge sums of money. That's not the case in a lot of parts of the world. I've traveled, and I bought jewelry once in Mexico City. They gave it to me in a brown paper bag, and it was an upscale jewelry store. And they said, this is how you walk down the street with this. We can't give you a bag like a Tiffany's bag or a bag such as Cartier might give you, because you might end up dead before you get back to your hotel. And yeah, so this is like I say, this is a way to defend the people who are at the top. And you know, the other good point that you raised was about this GoFundMe page. I would venture to say that they are going to have a bit of a problem in paneling a jury in which there's not at least one person who is willing to say, no, I won't convict this person, because the response has been such that we've got a very divided country on that point. A lot of people are of the view that guy got what he deserved. And I certainly don't believe that. I don't think violence is the answer and killing people is the answer to health care reform in this country. But in the end, is there one person out of 12 or 2 out of 12 that might feel that way? I don't know. And so, and then, of course, you've got the other case out of New York, the Penny case, and he was acquitted. You know, whether or not we're going to see, you know, people take to the streets again, I don't think so. I think there are a lot of cases where, and I think it's a sort of dead bang case in which somebody is in the wrong. Here, I think I've listened to both sides of this, and to be quite frank, I have no idea how I would have, you know, decided if I had sat on that jury.
Yeah.
You know, did this young man ever intend to go out that day and kill anybody? Did he intend to do that when he was trying to restrain somebody?
Yeah, the case
so.
Steve is referring to is a white former Marine who was on public transportation, and there was an African-American guy who was, quote-unquote, threatening people, and the former Marine put him in a chokehold, resulting in the other guy's death. And his parents were saying, he had mental problems, he wasn't a threat. And Daniel Penny was put on trial, and the jury told the judge, there's no way we're not going to reach a verdict. We are hopelessly deadlocked. And I guess, is it right, prosecutors, Steve, have said they're not going to retry him? It's just over?
I mean, I have not heard anything beyond the verdict. I know that so there were two possible verdicts that they could have reached. The more serious of which they dropped because the jury came back to the prosecutor and the judge and said that we're deadlocked on this. So they just dropped it. Basically, it's a tactic so that you could say, okay, we have only got the one charge, the lesser charge, so therefore the jury can go ahead and feel free to find him guilty on it. But they said not guilty on that, and they came back with questions to the judge about what it means to commit involuntary manslaughter and that sort of thing. And so, I mean, it's a really difficult case, and I would argue that it's less about race and more about just knowing where things lie, depending upon where you are. I mean, I've been here in downtown Chicago for over 30 years, and you ride the L. I see this sort of thing all the time. People were disturbed, people who were on drugs, people doing the kind of thing. Now, I've gotten used to it, but I'm almost 6'2", 200 pounds. It doesn't bother me. And I've had to intervene when people such as this have bothered somebody else. But here you have a young man who's not from New York, doesn't understand the culture, doesn't understand that that this kind of thing happens. And by and large, 99.9% of the time, they're not a threat. But then how do you know what he's supposed to think?
Yeah,
because in his world, here's somebody who's quite evidently threatening people. Not to mention that car was full of witnesses. And the defense piled them on and said, look, everybody in that car said that this guy was being threatening. So, I mean, I don't know how you find him guilty. At the same time, I want to protect people who are mentally unstable. Like I say, I don't have the answer on this one.
Yeah, I don't think any of us do, Steve, but thank you for the call. We need to take a real quick break. We've got more callers. We'll try to get to all of them right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Oh, we are taking your calls for this first hour of the show today. Let's go to our good friend Jim, who is on the line from Chicago. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Joan. Good afternoon. A little birdie told me this morning they had the guts to watch Meet the Press, and our supernatural leader, the Alpha and the Omega, was on. Dictating whatever policy to the moderator because they wouldn't dare ask him anything that made any sense. But what I'm looking forward to is when he gets those 400 people who are out of jail and pardons them all. My prediction is, I argue all the prediction business, which is crazy to do. But anyway, they'll probably write books, and people, and the sad part about it is about 50% of our populace don't read anymore. They've given up reading. But they'll buy those books because those are political prisoners that suffered for the Great Fuhrer, and they feel that they're part of the new American landscape, don't you think?
Oh, I am so sad at the lack of, even if it's, I don't know if it's a disinterest in reading. It seems to be a disinterest in information. It seems to be a disinterest in or a lack of ability to critically think. I don't think I know at least one person who I know proudly voted for Donald Trump because they consider themselves a Republican and they quote unquote always vote Republican. Okay, well, I understand being loyal to a party, but I would like to think, Jim, that if the Democratic Party put up a candidate who I felt was a bad candidate, that I would vote for the other party. I remember in Illinois some years back, we had a Republican who was running for Senate by the name of Mark Kirk. And I read a lot about him, and he kind of reminded me a little bit of Adam Kinzinger. You know, he made sense. He was honest. He was smart. He had served in the military. Yeah, he was a Republican and not a Democrat, but he seemed like a good guy. He seemed like somebody worth voting for.
Yeah, Joan, all I can think of is my sweetheart, my doll, would vote for Thompson. And I'd hold her bike or whatever, get a car and pull me. And I'd roll my eyes because I was like, you know, I couldn't vote for, but I'm the same way. I couldn't vote for a Republican if I was boiled in oil. But I'm sure there's people that died and well Republicans. But this one, this man is so flawed that, and it's so dangerous.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
wanted to say, I don't want to get in political discussions with people I care about, but, okay, you always, your whole life, you voted Republican, so you were able to get past the fact that he's a convicted felon, he's an adjudicated rapist. By the Washington Post recorded him lying more than 30,000 times when he was in the presidency before. So he's a liar, adjudicated rapist, convicted felon, fraudster, con man. But it's more important to you to pull a Republican ballot. I just don't get that.
But Joan, our press is terrified of him. Our press is terrified.
Seemingly, yes.
They're terrified of him.
And the bad thing is, Jim, that's not going to protect them. You know, people like Jeff Bezos. Oh, I'm so glad I didn't let my paper endorse Kamala Harris. You know, and I think that Donald Trump is just doing. You know, he's just got some great ideas. Jeff Bezos, you think that's going to save you? You think that's going to make Donald Trump want to buy your rockets instead of Elon's rockets? I mean, all this placating and sucking up isn't going to get them anything.
But there's no prudence in any of these opinions. They're not going to experts. Trump is not an expert on the economy or the expert on history or anything else. Kamala Harris said it best. She said, remember, there's going to be terrible days. There's always going to be terrible, but you have to be pragmatic enough to look at the solution like FDR. What's going on? We have to try different things. It might not work this week. They might not work next week. But at least we got to try different solutions. You can't go in there like this individual who thinks he knows everything, and nobody on earth knows everything, Joe. I can testify to that. Anyway, all you do is laugh at it. It's absolutely hysterical. I feel sorry for Bobby because there's millions of Americans that feel that way. So Social Security in jeopardy, our health care up to Dr. Oz and Bobby Kennedy Jr. I mean, come on. You know, Dr. Oz hates any kind of, here he lives in, 2 mansions or 3 mansions? 1 foot for 1 mansion?
I can't count.
Yeah, but I mean, why are these people? Why don't they want European health care? I don't get it. The Europeans would go nuts. In France, if you did that in France, they'd be throwing bricks through the windows.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
And you know how many people go bankrupt because of medical bills in Europe?
Oh, yeah.
None of them. Zero.
I know.
You know how many people go bankrupt in this country because of medical bills? Over 300,000 every year.
Yeah, and I've been in emergency rooms in Europe with my wife dying of cancer, and I can assure you, I asked one, I was in a hospital in Lithuania, of all places, and a French doctor, a young woman, she said, I said, any charge? She goes, oh, no, dear, there's no charge for this. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, no computer work, no paperwork. I just told her the circumstances. But I mean, this is such a we're so consumer driven here in the United States that it's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. Anyway, Joan, I talked enough. You have a great show.
Thank you, Jim.
I'm glad you survived the week. I'm glad you survived the weekend. Take care, Joan.
Yeah, I did. I didn't triumph over the weekend, but I survived. Let's go to Hoffman Estates again. Mary is on the line. Hi, Mary. Mary? Paul, is Mary there? Okay, well, let's go to Roosevelt then. Maybe we can find Mary later. Hey, Roosevelt, how are you?
How you doing, Joan? Thank you for taking my call. Hey, listen, real quick, has it made it on your radar the news or the that Trump said that he wants to annex Mexico and possibly Canada?
People have said things like that, but you remember when he said that we should, what was it, either annex or buy Greenland? That was his plan last time around.
I remember that.
And, I got to tell you, Roosevelt, Canada has a lot more to offer than Greenland. So if we're going to be annexing or buying another country, I vote for Canada.
Well, the reason why I'm bringing it up is because I was listening to the Spanish show that's on every day, and that's the first thing that they ran with that. I mean, it was really, people were up. There was only one guy, and happens to be a Trump supporter, saying, why do we have to, we as Mexicans, why do we have to be under the thumb of the United States? Not under the thumb, I want to correct myself, on welfare, basically, because Mexico has accepted money because of the deal that Trump made with Mexico of keeping all these people from Venezuela coming up here. So the lady that runs the show said, hey, wait a minute. Mexico's not getting money just for anything. It's costing Mexico the fact that people are staying in Mexico with the deal that he made with the last president, Obrador. So that was a talk today in the Spanish news channels and everything else as far as that. But what's interesting is that he mentioned Canada also. So, but right now, I believe, Joan, in my opinion, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
I believe he's given away the plan. He wants to copy dictators such as Putin. And what is Putin doing with Ukraine? So he wants to do the same thing.
Oh, by the way, did you hear Donald Trump said that now that Syria has fallen, then it's time for a ceasefire and a negotiated settlement in Ukraine. And I'm not quite sure how in Donald Trump's mind those two events are connected. But apparently, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria has led Donald Trump to believe that this is the perfect time for a ceasefire in Ukraine. We'll see if his good buddy Vlad goes along with that. What do you think, Roosevelt? Do you think he will?
Anything is possible with this guy. But what's also interesting to me, because my mother is 93 years old, and she's so mad. And I told Mom, don't worry about it, because he says a lot of things. He throws everything against the wall to see what sticks. But what's interesting, and I told her, what is interesting is, to me, he's given away a lot of plans, because he's starting things with Mexico, he's starting things with Canada, and he's really pointing the finger at Mexico, because just 2 weeks ago, he brought up the tariffs with our new woman Mexican president. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that he's starting a lot of things before he even gets in there.
Though supposedly after he made those comments, the two of them had a phone call which they said resolved their differences. So I didn't see any transcript of that phone call. So we can just, but apparently she picked up the phone and she was like, dude, what are you talking about here, dude?
Yeah, I know all about that. I heard it in Spanish, and I saw her on that video pointing to the letter that she sent them. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't know who he's messing with. The way I think is this. Trump has got the reign of everything because of the Supreme Court. He's got the go-ahead to do whatever he wants. And did you hear, connected to that, is that Melania is thinking of suing the ladies from The View. What do you think of that?
Oh, God.
So they're back in their good graces as far as husband and wife, apparently. I mean, but they're cut from the same cloth, Joan. She's
they
no
are. They're both
than anybody
grifters.
Else.
They are.
Yep.
They absolutely are. And you know what? I hope the women of The View say, you know what? You want to sue us? Bring it on. Bring it on. And you just wait to see what we bring to court. You just wait.
That's interesting. I never thought of it that way.
That's what I hope they do. We'll see.
I'm with you, Joan. I used to love Jon Stewart, but I'm with you all the way. I told my mom, I'm so disappointed in Jon Stewart as of today. I told her. She goes, he's doing what? I go, he's thinking of quitting because I believe he's afraid of losing all that money in lawyer bills, or whatever they bring up against him.
Yeah.
Because he's on a vengeance. Oh, and in closing, Joan, is it true that Biden's thinking of Liz Cheney, pardoning her? And
that's supposedly everybody who Kash Patel and Donald Trump are planning to go after criminally are people that Biden is considering pardoning. And I hope to God he does. I'd like to talk more about this, but we're way over, and I've got to get to the news,
Thank
Roosevelt.
You.
Thanks for the call.
Joan, I appreciate you giving me so much time. Have a nice day.
We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
COVID-19 has cast a spotlight on the stark inequalities that drive poverty. The poorest communities in the U.S. and around the world are suffering.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
Our next guest, one of the writers at Washington Monthly Magazine, has a family emergency. So for at least the next 30 minutes, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing. 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. We're going to continue to take your calls and read your texts. Roosevelt was talking about what is going on with Trump and his claims about what he wants to do with Canada and Mexico. So I wanted to share these two texts with you. Trump said that if we're going to subsidize Canada and Mexico, which we do because we don't charge enough in tariffs, that we should make them states. I don't think he really means to make them states. He was making a point because we don't charge them enough. We're subsidizing them. So we should make them a state. I don't understand that last part. Make them a state. Oh, I see. Make them a state. Yeah, he didn't mean it. And, we have a very beneficial trade relationship with both of those countries. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. But it is good, and it is not like we are being wildly taken advantage of. So, again, Donald Trump shooting from the hip. Another texter, I've got a friend who lives in Canada, and a couple of months ago she told me they were frightened that Donald Trump would take over Canada. This friend told our texter that there's a lot of Trumpers up there. Kids, we are not going to take over Canada. We are not going to take over Mexico. And just like in the first Trump administration, we didn't buy Greenland. I forget, why did we want to buy Greenland anyway? I don't see exactly what it was that Greenland brought to the table. Okay. So we've got that going for us. A couple other things I wanted to share. One thing that Donald Trump and Kash Patel, who is Donald Trump's choice to be head of the FBI. First of all, Christopher Wray, let's review. Christopher Wray, who is currently the head of the FBI, was put in that job by guess which president? Donald Trump. Donald Trump put Christopher Wray into that job at the FBI. But you know what? That was back in the before times when Donald Trump was at least going through the motions of trying to pick people who were remotely qualified for their jobs. But apparently Christopher Wray's loyalty is not as complete as that of Kash Patel. And one thing Kash Patel has said is that anybody who was on, and Donald Trump has said, anybody who was on the January 6th committee in Congress, those are people who are going to be prosecuted because, I don't know why, because they came after him. That's all it takes. So Adam Schiff was on Morning Joe this morning because he is one of those folks. And he was talking about Donald Trump going after the January 6th committee members. Listen to Adam Schiff.
Country could hear and see and learn about what took place on that awful day, a really important form of congressional accountability. So we're proud of what we did. But I do think to underscore the point you were all just making, this is not just about retribution against those of us on the committee. This is about sending a message that no one better hold him to account in his second term. No one better look at what he does, do their congressional job, that he is intent on trying to break down these checks and balances in our system. That's where the danger lies, more so than to the members of the committee. I think the American people are very concerned about crime. They want an FBI director and an attorney general to deal with fentanyl and deal in California with smash and grab robberies. This is not what they're looking for, to turn the agencies into some vehicle of political retribution.
Jeff on Morning Joe, he is not afraid. Also, somebody else who's not afraid is Liz Cheney. She has been the target of Donald Trump's wrath. Supposedly, he wants Kash Patel to go after her. And she said, you know what? Not only is she not afraid of that, but she thinks that all of the documentation in these investigations, the January 6th investigation and everything else, that all that documentation should see the light of day. All that testimony, all that information. American public paid to compile those reports. We should have a chance to see what is inside them. We are going to keep the phone lines open for the next hour, 773-763-9278. But we are going to take a real quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be joined by our good friend, Professor Joel Ostro from Benedictine University. That and more right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. On WCPT 820.
The big story over the weekend was the very quick collapse of the regime in Syria. Assad and his family slinking out of the country, getting asylum in the Soviet Union. And I think my favorite part of that story was it was announced that they were being given asylum on the basis of humanitarian needs. Oh, yeah, there's some serious irony. In the wake of the collapse of the official government of Syria, for some reason, and I'm not quite sure what, maybe Joel can give us some insight, Donald Trump has started saying, well, Syria collapsed, time for a ceasefire in Ukraine. I don't know how we made that leap of logic, or whether or not anybody in the Kremlin is paying attention, but I thought it would be a good thing to ask Joel Ostro about. He is our expert on Russia. He's a political science professor at Benedictine University. Joel, thank you so much for joining us on short notice.
Always a pleasure to be on with you, Joan. But I don't like this question. You're asking me to explain why Trump says what he says.
Well, I don't understand the link. I guess,
no.
Russia.
But is that news with Trump?
Yeah. Russia, as it was explained to me, Joel, Russia needed Assad to stay in power because Syria being under Russia's thumb, or at least related and happy with them, allowed Russia to access the ports along Syria's coast. Same thing for Iran, that Syria was an important access to coasts and ports and shipping for them. And the belief was that Putin would do whatever he could to bolster Assad's regime and keep him in power for that. So does this mean that Vladimir Putin failed?
Well, on the first part of it, the ports, and I will be quite upfront. I'm speculating now. I had not followed this aspect of Russia's interest in Syria that closely, but just knowing geography and Russia's current needs during the strong sanctions regime that it has faced since invading Ukraine, I would imagine those ports are primarily important for their trying to dodge the sanctions and continue to export oil and gas. I can't imagine why else they would have expended such resources and risk in propping up the Assad regime. There really isn't that much else that Russia gets out of that relationship that I can see, other than it had been a foothold in the Middle East to try to counter U.S. influence, perhaps.
I'm curious.
This is certainly a loss, though, to answer the other part of your question. Yeah, they did have substantial assets and expended quite a lot of effort to arm and to keep Assad in power.
I'm curious. We seem to be unsure of the coalition that toppled the Assad regime, but it is seemingly believed that at least one member of the group is ISIS. What kind of a relationship would that mean that ISIS, if they do come to predominate, would they have a good relationship with Vladimir Putin? How do they feel about Russia?
Boy, that's news to me, Joan. Everything I had read up through last night, I had not read about the rebel forces who have entered Damascus this morning. But ISIS was pretty isolated from almost all of those groups. I know that the main one that has been reported on and the leader of that group that was interviewed, I believe it was on CNN, has publicly and explicitly announced opposition to ISIS. Many of these groups fought against ISIS as it was rolling in Syria at the same time that we were fighting against ISIS, with the Kurdish groups as well. So that would be news. I can't see.
I'm trying to remember where I saw that speculation. That might have been CNN.
Wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense that those ISIS and these other groups have opposed views on how to govern, how to rule. It just the only other than the enemy is my friend. Certainly, ISIS was opposed to the Assad regime and was fighting against it. But to suggest that this is that they are aligned with any of the major groups that have opposed the other major groups, that has not been the case up till now.
I want you to weigh in on this. This was reporting in the Wall Street Journal, talked about in the hours before Assad left the country. As Assad dialed for help from foreign governments in his last hours as Syria's leader, he found that he had run out of allies and military allegiance. The swift fall of Damascus confirmed how the regime was in worse shape than we thought, said some security analysts from the Swedish Defense Research Agency. The Syrian government received a knockout blow early on. So he called Iran, he called Vladimir Putin, and got crickets?
Well, apparently Putin said, come on, because that's where he is now. If I were in Assad's shoes, I mean, neither one of those destinations is particularly desirable. But I guess if I had to choose, I would also choose Russia, maybe.
Tell me something, Joel. Do you think that there's a possibility that part of the reason why Putin offered shelter to Assad was if this rebel group finds that they can't form a government, if they're just brought down by infighting and there's just chaos, do you think Putin's potentially playing the long game of keeping Assad, and if things don't go well with the new people who've taken over, maybe bringing Assad back?
Possibly. I would answer it the other way. Was there any reason for Putin not to take him in? That was the first question I asked when I learned that he was on his way to Russia. What does he lose? What does Putin stand to lose? He doesn't necessarily, and that's kind of how he thinks. I've described him in the past as one who's a destroyer, and then or will sow chaos and then look for a way for Russia to benefit from it. That's what he did with the Wagner Group throughout North Africa. And that is what he has done in trying to destabilize the democracies in Europe and North America. It's not necessarily that he has a clear positive agenda, but through his negative actions, if you will, he finds ways for Russia to benefit. So in this case, taking Assad in, perhaps preserves options in the future, but in any case, he hasn't lost anything by bringing him in. It's not that there's gain, but sort of the why not?
Yeah.
Right?
And what about Iran in all this?
Yeah, so first of all, anyone who tries to say that they saw this coming in Syria or thinks that they have, I don't want to say some explanation. People can explain anything. I can as well. But to suggest that anyone who says they were not surprised by this is lying, and you should turn them off and listen to somebody else. Let's put it that way.
Well, why was this such a... Now everybody, like with 20/20 hindsight, is saying, oh, well, his troops were weak and, demoralized and making it sound like this was inevitable.
Yeah, then we would have seen signs of this for months. So that's a load of crap. We don't know yet exactly what happened, and maybe it'll be a while before we do. My best guess, and that is all you're going to get from anyone, is a guess. My best guess is that some of these rebel groups guessed themselves that they had an opening with the decapitation of Hezbollah and Russia's being tied up in Ukraine. And Iran sort of being a typical Iran, weighing what has happened recently and being very cautious about their own grip on rule domestically, that those rebels made a calculation that now is a time to move. And they guessed right, because the only way I can explain the instantaneous collapse of the Syrian military is that they were told quite clearly by the Russian Ministry of Defense that Russia's not coming to help, and that they were told by Iran's leadership and defense ministry that they are not coming to help. And so although the Syrian military could have fought, without help, the long-term prospects were gone. And so then they looked at Assad and said, well, we got no reason to support this you-know-what anymore. Let's see what comes next. And you will note that the prime minister has remained. So much of the rest of the government has remained.
Well, the way the Wall Street Journal told the story, Assad was supposed to give a major address Saturday night, and all of a sudden it came time for the major address, and everybody's looking around going like, where's Assad? Where's Assad? Where's Assad? And apparently he was already gonski.
Yeah, well, because by then it was clear that the rebels had taken over Aleppo, had moved into Homs, and that they would be moving towards Damascus. So whether, we don't know how unified was Assad with his defense minister and prime minister as this began to unfold. Joan, it happened all with, 36 hours? Yeah, I was telling my friends and colleagues in a group chat with a bunch of alumni and some faculty that don't expect the Assad regime to last until spring. And then about 2 hours later, I amended that. Maybe we should say till New Year's. And then I amended that a couple hours later. Maybe we should amend that till tomorrow. So that's how fast it went.
Yeah.
Those messages were in the span of about 4 hours. So, again, how do I explain it? All it is right now is guesses, but it was not to Assad. It was to the Syrian Defense Ministry that their patrons were saying peace out. And so then why fight? Why kill their own people? Why see their own soldiers dead? Let's keep our soldiers alive, see who comes to power, and we will still be the Syrian military defending whatever the government of Syria emerges. They're trying to save their butts.
I was going to ask you about that.
The defense minister. Yeah.
So Assad and his family pack up their bags and get on a plane to Russia. Everybody else is still there. So as the rebels come in, what is the prime minister saying now? Hey, guys, it wasn't me. It was all him.
I don't think it's that.
I'm on your side. You can work with me. I will help you. Are those the conversations you think that are taking place now?
No, because neither they nor the leaders of these rebel groups are fools. The rebels know who was organizing the fighting against them. And the government knows that these rebel groups, there are many. This is not like this is some unified, Che Guevara type of guerrilla operation from Cuba. There are at least a dozen, I don't know how many groups. There are a lot. And they were regionally based in different areas, loosely aligned at best. None of them capable of, experienced with, or possibly even having an interest in governing the whole country. But there does need to be a government in the country. So I think the existing government, the remnants of it, are demonstrating a willingness to work with them to govern the country in a new way. And then some will survive and some will no doubt be arrested, probably executed. But without an immediate path out, they're hoping that and this did happen across East Central Europe in the immediate aftermath of the collapse of the communist regimes there. Many of the mid-level and some upper-level government officials remained to govern sort of in a transitional basis until the dust settled. And those places where that happened successfully tended to have a somewhat more stable transformation. Although long-term, many of those places ended up going more to the right. Hungary was one of them, for example. So time will tell, but clearly that's the thinking right now is someone's got to govern this place, and these guys can't. And I think also it reflects a unity of purpose to not let ISIS get a foothold. I think that's the evidence for that, too. They all see that as an urgent need to prevent that.
I'm talking to political science professor Joel Ostrow from Benedictine University. We need to take a break. When we come back, Joel, I do want to focus on the European Union and NATO and Ukraine. Like I said, Donald Trump has said that this is a terrific time for a ceasefire in Ukraine and time for everybody to sit down and talk about things. We had that statement from the UK Prime Minister, who apparently wanted Donald Trump to know he was not going to take sides if Donald Trump was trying to split people off from the EU. I want to talk about all of what's going on in Western and Eastern Europe with Professor Ostrow when we come right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
And I'm joined by political science professor Joel Ostrow from Benedictine University. We were talking about what happened with the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria. But I want to shift gears now and look at the European Union Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Ukraine, and where things stand and what might change once Donald Trump is sworn in as our next president. Joel, let's start with this idea that Trump is apparently talking about, that now is the perfect time for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Is it? Is it the perfect time?
He's essentially been saying this, something similar to this for months. It's consistent with the MAGA America First demand to basically disengage entirely from American leadership in the world, from our obligations to our allies. In short, to stop sending aid and arms to Ukraine. So I think that's what's behind this, without making it look like what he's saying is Russia, do what you want. Mm-hmm. But someone's got to explain to me why Russia would have any interest in a ceasefire if the future is that the United States is no longer going to be supporting Ukraine.
Exactly.
There is no logical reason, right? It's not like Putin cares about human life. It's not like he cares about the deaths of Russian soldiers. He's lost 1 million to death or grave wounding to the point that they can no longer be on the battlefield. Just shy of 1 million people have been lost in this war. So clearly he doesn't care about that. So why not keep sending them to the meat grinder and accomplish the objective of eliminating Ukraine as a sovereign state?
But if Donald Trump keeps calling for this and Vladimir Putin wants to make sure that Donald Trump continues to be his puppet, wouldn't Vladimir want to do something that makes Trump look like he's doing something, accomplishing something? It wouldn't give anybody anything in the short term, but in the long term, to keep that relationship, to keep Donald Trump thinking that Vladimir Putin is the best guy ever and we have a great relationship. We're friends. He's not using me.
The only one who thinks that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have a relationship is Donald Trump.
I know, but doesn't it behoove Putin for Donald Trump to continue to think that? And could throwing him, whether it's with Ukraine or something else, throwing him some kind of sop just to make him look like he's actually got some power, isn't that in Putin's long-term interest?
Yeah, maybe he could say that there's a ceasefire and keep firing rockets at Kyiv. He's as good at disinformation as he's better at disinformation than Trump is. So he can just deny that they're bombing Ukraine while he's bombing Ukraine. I just don't see Russia stopping if America is going to withdraw. Now, if the Republican Party had any kind of spine and somehow were able to convince Trump that he had to keep supporting Ukraine, then maybe that changes the calculus a little bit. Clearly, Putin was counting on and aiding in a Republican victory with the hope that would mean, to quote Donald Trump, he can do whatever the hell he wants. Meaning Putin.
And what exactly do you think that means in the long term, doing whatever the hell he wants? Going after NATO? Going after other countries?
No. The Russia's military capacity has been so damaged that it's hard to imagine them posing any kind of realistic threat beyond Ukraine, possibly Moldova at this point. But as they put it, quote unquote, and it curdles my spine to say these words, finishing the job in Ukraine certainly is a priority for Putin internally to be able to declare a total victory. But
what is a total victory? Does that mean there's nothing short of taking over the whole country? Is that it?
Correct.
Correct. So even if for some reason they were willing to agree to giving him some sort of land corridor to Crimea, you don't think that Putin could could frame that as a victory?
He could do that with a caveat that the sanctions regime needs to be lifted so that then Russia, which has already gone on a war footing, can restock its advanced missiles and then finish the job.
Wait a minute. You think
get the technology to rearm its advanced guided missiles and bombs, because what it's producing right now is fairly rudimentary in the technological sense.
So you think any kind of ceasefire would be something that would be a lie, basically? Yeah, that's I guess what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It would just be a stalling tactic,
as it was with the Minsk Accords. A decade
refresh
ago.
My memory on the Minsk Accords. I'm confused.
After the initial seizure of Crimea and of part of eastern Ukraine in 2014, the Obama administration, following the lead of Angela Merkel in Germany, reached agreement with Russia in Minsk, is where the negotiations happened. So they were called the Minsk Accords, that basically declared a ceasefire. Russia would stop moving on territory in Ukraine. Ukraine it would not have a path to EU or NATO membership, and Russia would be able to continue to export oil and gas to Europe. And Putin agreed to that, while always planning to increase its military capacity with the goal of taking over Ukraine, which they then did in 2022. They launched that invasion. They never intended anything other than to do that. So this would be another period of rearming, and were there a ceasefire now, but it would just be a lie.
Huh. Oh, that's not very cheery. So you think that there's
You're
basically...
the one who invited me on.
Yeah. The bottom line, do I understand that no matter what Vladimir Putin, no matter what agreement is put in place, what ceasefire is agreed to, Vladimir Putin is going to keep going until he accomplishes what he set out to accomplish?
Yeah, was it, I can't remember if it was Biden who said this, or perhaps Obama towards the end of his administration, but I think it was Biden. If Putin says it, you can trust that it's a lie.
And
he's not a trustworthy negotiating partner, which makes him an ideal negotiating partner for Donald Trump.
Because why? He'll tell Trump whatever he wants to hear, and then Trump can walk away going, look at what I did. Look at what I got him to agree to.
Yep. Trump will hear whatever he wants to hear, and we already know that Trump will say whatever he wants to say. So, and his legions will follow him, Trump, regardless of what he says.
And what do you think about what's going to happen with NATO?
It's really hard to say, Joan. Much will depend on what the EU decides will be its posture towards Ukraine in a Trump administration. I think the EU leaders are deluding themselves if they think that they can convince Trump to support Ukraine at the levels that has been the case in the past. But the European Union leaders have been prone to that delusional, hopeful thinking in the past. I think it's more likely that Trump comes in, the messaging changes, and then the EU has to decide what it wants to do. And the only way that it continues to support Ukraine the way that Ukraine has been receiving support up till now is if essentially the EU withdraws from NATO and creates its own European army.
Have you? I remember when we talked a while back, your speculation was that if Donald Trump won re-election, that the European Union would move toward creating their own military. Have you seen any indication that is being talked about or is being done?
There certainly is discussion across the European capitals along the lines of what do we do? What does the future look like? And how do we preserve how do we repel the authoritarian movements across Europe that have proven successful in the United States and Hungary? Because the EU has a constitution. There are standards on human rights which are much more expansive than they are in the United States, on social welfare policies and human dignity that authoritarian regimes do not respect. So if the EU is to hold together as any kind of meaningful entity, it does have to remain democratic and preserve those standards. And so the question is, how do they do it? And part of that is do they continue to support a democracy such as Ukraine? And that requires military. All of that requires security. So clearly, bringing European defense squarely with Europe and sort of accepting the United States' departure as a leader in defending the democracies has to be part of their consideration.
We need to take a break. Joel, when we come back, there was a very well-publicized statement by the UK Prime Minister saying, basically alluding to the fact that perhaps he had a conversation with Donald Trump where Donald Trump said, are you going to be with America or are you going to be with Europe? And he made a very well-covered speech where he said, you know what? That's just wrong. Don't ask me to decide, because that's just, that whole idea that it's one or the other is just wrong. I want to talk to you about that and other things after we come back from a quick break.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by Professor Joel Ostrow from Benedictine University. We have been talking about the election of Donald Trump to the presidency and what it means for NATO and for Europe, Western Europe and Eastern Europe. But recently, the Prime Minister of the UK gave a speech, and while he didn't directly say, Donald Trump asked me about this, the implication was clear, because he said, that the idea that the United Kingdom has to choose between supporting the United States and supporting the European Union, he said, that's just wrong. I won't do it. That's just wrong. Why do you think what would be the motivation for Donald Trump to say, oh, by the way, do you support me or do you support them? I don't get it.
You're doing it again. What did Reagan say? There you go again. Donald Trump does not understand. It's not just that he doesn't. He neither accepts nor understands the concept and the 70-year history of American leadership since World War II as the bulwark in support of democracy, in support of interconnectedness that has become economic globalization and political globalization. He neither recognizes the importance of nor cares about things like human rights, human security, political rights and freedoms. None of that matters to him. The only person that Donald Trump cares about is named Donald Trump. He doesn't even care about Donald Trump Jr. when it comes to that. He cares about Donald Trump. And so effectively what he's telling the UK is, if you support anyone else, you are not supporting us, and so we won't support you.
Say that again. If you're supporting anyone else, you're
then
not
you are not supporting us. That's how he understands things. If that's how he understands interpersonal relations, that's how he has behaved his entire career, not just political, but certainly since entering politics, right?
When you look at this incoming presidency, there's a lot of people, Joel, who are really, really, really frightened about what is going to be happening.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible it won't be as bad as we think? She said, hopefully. Hopefully.
Is it possible? Like, it is. Here's my worry. And it came into really crystal clear relief last week when South Korea's president made a power grab. So the situation was, and it's a little different, which is what makes it scarier here. His party, I think it's called the People's Power Party, his right-wing party in the South Korean parliament, had something like 105 or 107 seats in what was like a 315-member parliament. And so whatever legislation he was hoping to get through was not getting through exactly as he wanted. And so he tried to seize dictatorial power, declaring martial law and sending special forces and military to take over the legislature. The people of South Korea, who have a very crystal clear memory of military rule and dictatorship, poured into the streets in opposition, even in the middle of the night. And the legislature unanimously rejected his declaration of martial law. Unanimous, including all 105 members of his own party. And my initial question was, if Donald Trump tried to seize unlimited power, say deploy the military to take over cities where Democrats are in control, like Chicago, for example, would the American people pour into the streets to oppose it? And more significantly, would there be a unanimous opposition to such an effort in Congress? I don't even think you'd get a majority of Republicans. I really wonder if you'd even get 8 Republicans to oppose such an effort. And
would our military go along with that? Our military has always been one of their big basic tenets of existence has been that they are not to be used against the American people.
Joan Esposito, tell me who serves in the United States military. Who are those people? They're Americans, are they not?
Yes.
Did not 50% of the American population support a man who praises dictators, who admires authoritarians, and who said he wanted to rule like a dictator from day one? Did not half of the American public support that?
Slightly less than half, and his margin of victory over Kamala Harris was slim.
So half the American population supported it. So tell me, how did half of the military vote? Thank you. You don't need all the military. Half of the United States military is one big effing military. Yeah. And then tell me about the police. Tell me how the police in this country voted, Joan. Do you think it was only half? Or do you think it was more like 2/3 or 3/4? You're the one who invited me on.
You think that what happened in South Korea, Trump could at least try to pull it off here, but declaring martial law and...
Or something. Something that is fundamentally unconstitutional and obviously meant to end democracy as anyone would recognize it here. Would there be opposition to that? Using force to do that, or calling in force to do that? Who would stop them?
I really would like to think that the majority of our military would refuse an illegal order. I do. Call me Pollyanna, if you will. I do.
I hope you're right if it comes to that. But it's hard to see. And I think in South Korea, were it not for the unanimous declaration of Parliament, including all of the members of the president's party, perhaps those special forces that he sent would have fired their weapons, would have arrested and killed people. I think a critical act was that unanimity of the president's own party standing against him.
Yeah. That was the one thing that I read about with South Korea that I was a little nervous would not happen here. And that's the fact that members of his own party went to him and said, we don't support you in this. You've got to stop.
It's critical.
That was the one thing that I said to myself, well, that part of this whole process would not be something we could count on.
No. And then look at the people he's putting in charge. Look who he's putting in charge. Look who he wants to be as Secretary of Defense. And then imagine and listen to how he talks about the generals. Who is he going to install as Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as the Chief of Staff of the Army, of the Navy, of the Air Force? Do you think they're going to be people who are the chiefs now? Or are they going to be generals?
Supposedly, there's already a list that the military has been talking about, a list of people who are in high-ranking military positions who they want Hegseth to get rid of because they're not loyal enough to Donald Trump.
They're not MAGA, right?
And somebody who saw the list said that a surprising number of those high-ranking military officials happen to be women.
Yeah, not surprising.
When Hegseth was first nominated, I thought, oh, God, this is going to be terrible. And then there was so much that came out about his drunkenness, his financial malfeasance, his accusation of rape. I thought, well, this guy's not going to go anywhere. And yet he did the Trump thing where he just doubled down. And now I'm starting to worry that his defiance may make some Republican senators afraid. Supposedly there were 6 Republican senators who were ready to vote against him, and there only need to be 3. But I'm wondering if there will be even 3 in the final analysis. What do you think? What do you see?
Yeah, don't listen to what Susan Collins says. Watch what she does and watch what she has always done. She has never backed her words with actions. She has never backed her words with votes. So of most of those 6, I wouldn't trust them any further than I can throw them. They're all firmly behind Trump, and they just want to save their you-know-whats. It's a party of liars. And it has been for quite a while, Joan. I mean, you've heard me say this here since January 6th, but long before that I was saying that. They're a party of disinformation and lies. That's an authoritarian party. It is not a party consistent with democracy, through and through. And 49.9% fine of the American electorate that voted for that. Or at least voted in a way that said, we don't care about that. We're still going to vote for these guys.
Do you think the MAGAs are going to have buyer's remorse at any point, or do you think they're all in on this kind of a presidency? I know that's pure speculation, but I think, because, I don't know a lot of MAGAs, but the ones who I do know, I think that they think they're voting for a different guy than I see.
But how can that be?
I know.
How do you not know?
I think it's like that guy wrote, what was it, in the New Yorker about, the ambiance of information. Nobody really goes to credible sources. They hear stuff. They see stuff on social media. And if it sort of fits in with what they think might be going on, that's what they then believe, and, you know, God help you to try to convince them otherwise. I think
everyone in the country heard Donald Trump's speeches leading up to and on January 6th.
Yeah, but then how many people did you hear say he doesn't really mean that? That's just Trump being Trump. He doesn't mean that.
But it's willful ignorance, or they actually support. There is no other, like, they saw it with their own eyes, they heard it with their own ears. And the elected officials, all they care about is power. I mean, we saw what McCarthy did. We saw what McConnell did. You know, they all went 3 days later and kissed the ring. It's all they care about is power. There isn't principle there. They are an authoritarian party.
Well, you know, Joel, I hope you and I get cells next to one another. So as we are incarcerated in the coming regime, we can at least entertain each other.
Thanks for having me on again, Jonah.
Thank you. We are going to take a break for news. We'll be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
It has been a while since we have spoken with our good friend Greg Hines, political reporter for Crain's Chicago Business. Greg, how are you?
I'm fine, Joan. How are you? You survived the election in one piece?
I was bloodied but unbowed.
You haven't bought the new condo in Toronto?
No, I have not. But, you know, there's a village in Italy that's selling houses for $1 for Americans who want to relocate. And there's also some places in Tuscany that can be had for about the same price as a house over here. And I am not ruling it out, my good friend.
Well, you realize that. And no indoor plumbing, Joan, but certain sacrifices have to be made.
You know what? You do what you have to do. So we haven't spoken for a while. There's been a lot going on in Chicago city politics. Brandon Johnson doesn't seem to have taken to heart the Richie Daley rule that you never bring anything for a vote in front of the city council if you aren't sure you've got the votes to pass it. Why he brought that $300 million property tax increase before the city council, I don't understand. I mean, it was unanimously voted down. Even his allies voted against it. So what was the point? So that later on the campaign trail, he can say, well, look, I knew we needed money. Remember when I tried to get that, that property tax increase? Or, remember when I did that and it got voted down? I don't see what he gains. What is the political upside to bringing something to the floor that hasn't a prayer of getting voted through?
Beats me, Joan. All I can say is all I can do is repeat what the mayor says. That he didn't really propose a budget as much as throw a couple ideas out there on the table. And since he's a great collaborator, he just wanted to get the conversation started.
Well, that's what he always says. It's all about a give and take and collaboration, and yet that doesn't seem to be what the members of city council think. I mean, I hear and read complaints all the time that there isn't that kind of collaboration. I don't know. I find this particular administration very puzzling in the things they do. They do some things that seem to me to be so obvious as a violation of Politics 101. Give me your big take here.
Hey, Joe, my kind of big take is that there have been questions since Brandon Johnson took office that I think are only increasing as to, frankly, whether he's up for the job. He's had trouble assembling a first-class team around him. His legislative and lobbying team has been decimated. He makes strange choices, like despite like last year spending his political capital in Springfield not on getting more money for the city, but on getting more money for the Bears. Even if you're a Bears fan, that's a bit of a head scratcher. He's tried to explain away aides that have been caught. I'll use the word skirt chasing.
He did. That's the other thing. I didn't know anything about. Nobody told me that this person who's very high up in my administration was being accused of all this inappropriate behavior. Nobody told me, Greg.
Yeah, that's what he says. Like I said, there are increasing questions about whether he's up for the job.
Supposedly, not that this, I suppose, doesn't happen in political life. I've been reading more and more about these lists of just how many people are going to be considering a run for mayor. And last time I saw the list, I think it was up to 12 names that I thought that some people speculated were people who were going to throw their hat in the ring. What do you think about that? How many will he have challengers? How many will there be?
Golly gee, 12 might be small. There
really?
Are at least
we had 14.
There's at least a half a dozen aldermen who want to be considered. The state controller, the state secretary of state, a North Side congressman, and I'm sure a bunch of others yet to be named who will be coming in.
Cam Buckner's name I've heard mentioned before.
Yeah, I mean, none of this. I mean, we're talking 2 years.
That's just business as usual, Greg, or is it because of this particular mayor and his perhaps?
It's because of this mayor. Usually this kind of talk begins in serious, maybe 18 months out from an election, but in this case it's well over 2 years, and it's a tribute to the fact that the political class smells blood in the water. There was a poll the other day that showed his approval rating at 14% job approval. There is still a little bit of time to recover, but those are awfully bad numbers. Other ambitious politicians and other people who think they can do a better job say, hey, there's an opportunity here, so let's take a look at it. How this is all going to pan out is far too early to say, but you are absolutely right. There is huge interest.
Okay, let's take a look at the problems with the school board and the teacher's contract. One thing I think Brandon Johnson has not done a good job at is convincing people that he is independent of the Chicago Teachers Union. He, of course, worked for them. They spent a lot of shoe leather and money to get him elected. And, so the word has been that he's just a proxy. He's a rubber stamp for them. But the teachers don't have a new contract. And his efforts to get a short-term, high-interest loan to get enough money to make the deal that's on the table work were shot down by Pedro Martinez, and now he seems to have gone to war with Pedro Martinez. Give me your take on all this stuff as it's unfolded.
Well, first, it's terribly messy in a political sense. I mean, if you're going to get in a brawl with a subordinate who normally you'd be able to fire and without any problems, you don't get into that brawl if you know you're not going to win. And so far, he hasn't won, and he looks weak. If you're a Chicago mayor, the last thing you want to do is look weak. Two, he continues to see the difference between governing for his folks, the people who put him in office, and governing for the rest of the city. I'll be charitable and say that this is what the mayor honestly believes, as opposed to the CPS, the CTU pulling his strings. But there is no question that he seems to think what's good for the union is what's good for Chicago. And ask any property tax owner, any homeowner, if raising more taxes to pay for more jobs at CPS is something they want, and they're going to tell you no, that's not good for Chicago. But he just, that's been a core problem since the beginning. To give you another example, he insisted in getting involved in the city council fight about whether to back Israel or the Palestinians and what's going on in Gaza. There are two extraordinarily strong differences of opinion there. There was no reason for the mayor to get involved, but his progressive group wanted him to get involved on the Palestinian side, and he did. And in the process, I'm sure a lot of Jewish Chicagoans are saying, "What the heck? Why is this guy doing this? He's not representing us."
Everybody said when I was complaining about the early days of Lori Lightfoot, you and other people kept saying, give her time. She doesn't come from a government background. It's going to take her for a while to figure things out. And I was being all grumpy. I feel like I'm in the same situation again. I'm no political genius, Greg. You perhaps have gleaned this over the years, but I see Brandon Johnson. I see Brandon Johnson making mistakes that even I know could be avoided. So is it just this? Should we give him more time? Do we give him more time to get his feet under him?
Well, I mean, we don't have any choice. There's no recall in Illinois law. He's going to be mayor unless he quits for another 26 months, and that's the way it's going to be. 126, more like 28. He's got the job. Will he turn things around? Man, if this budget episode is an example. He's not learning. We're now into mid-December. Everybody's out Christmas shopping, and the city council hasn't even begun to vote yet. There isn't a final proposal on the table yet. I think the odds that the city can enter the new year without a budget are increasing. That would be disastrous to the city's already bad reputation. Money and capital and jobs and investment go to places where people feel comfortable, where they see political stability, where they don't think they're going to lose their shirt on taxes. And none of that is the case here now. It only sends out the message about, you don't want to go to Chicago. It's a bad place. There was a piece in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend. Whatever you think of the Wall Street Journal, it said that Ken Griffin isn't the only rich guy who's lost his shirt on Chicago condominiums. That been investing in big condos there has become bad because nobody wants to live there. They're leaving. Now that's terrible for the city. You can't whatever you think of rich people and wealth. If you don't have wealth in your town, you don't have a tax base, or at least not. That means that little people have to make up the difference. The central business district has huge vacancies. The mayor continues to stick by the head of the CTA, despite the fact that most commuters are not very happy with the CTA. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah. Greg Hines, we need to take a break. I'm talking to political reporter Greg Hines from Crain's Chicago Business. We are going to continue this right after a break.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm talking to political reporter Greg Hines from Crain's Chicago Business. Greg, give me your take on the current city council of Chicago.
Divided, factionalized, lack of any kind of a consensus. That's the easiest thing. I mean, there's whatever your politics are, there's going to be somebody you like in the city council and somebody you don't like. It's a vacuum, and the history books say that the civics books say that Chicago, on paper, has a strong council weak mayor system. That has usually not been the case because the mayors have been able to get their stuff together, and frankly, because aldermen go cheap. But this mayor hasn't figured that out, and as a result, we have fighting. We don't have consensus. We don't have agreement on what needs to be done. Be it whether or not we're going to have shop spotter, or whether the CT is going to get the money it wants, or how we're going to handle migrants, or whatever. I mean, the list is just there. It's a body of 50 people. Only a strong mayor can herd these cats, and right now he ain't doing it.
Well, they did come together 50-0 to vote down his $300 million tax hike. So I guess there is that. Also, what do you think about Governor Pritzker's idea to turn the old steelworks into a supercomputing park?
I think that the governor's onto something. I understand there's some environmental concerns. There's some of the lakefront preservationist types want to turn it all into a park. I think there's a way to satisfy both people and turn some of it into the park and green area. But the truth of the matter is, an area that once was a star of Chicago's economy has been dead vacant for almost half a century now. Absolutely worthless, abandoned.
It's been almost 30 years since the steel plant closed, hasn't it?
Yeah, and it was in the process of closing for a number of years before that. Now you have this fast evolving technology. There's a lot of people in the tech biz who know a lot more about it than I do, who say that quantum computing, which is the next stage, it could do for the computing business what the transistor did, moving away from vacuum tubes. The job potential and the investment potential is enormous. The U.S. Department of Defense has already made a big bet. The private companies made a big bet. The state of Illinois has made a big bet. We'll see if it all pays off. But given how much AI has taken off in the last couple of years, and quantum computing is a kissing cousin to that, there's some real potential here. So I give Pritzker a lot of credit for getting involved and making Illinois the center of this emerging business. The local universities, Northwestern, Chicago, Illinois, are all involved in it. And like I said, while I understand the concern of some of the park advocates who'd like to turn it all into a big green space, that isn't going to happen. The money's not going to happen. Let's go for the reasonable middle here and get the jobs and the investment the city needs, and take some green space as part of the deal.
Were you surprised when the demographics of the most recent vote were published? And it seemed like the Republicans made some serious inroads. I mean, Chicago is still blue, blue, blue. But the conservative wards and precincts that always voted Republican did, and a few extras. I mean, they made gains. Did that surprise you?
What was Jimmy Carter's and Bill Clinton's political guy used to say, it's the economy, stupid? Well, it's still the economy, stupid. Inflation has really devastated parts of the American demographic, particularly lower income folks. And given a choice between somebody who they think is going to do something about inflation and somebody who is going to do something for people of color based on their ethnic or racial identity, they chose the former. Not all of them, but a good chunk of them. What happened in Chicago is that there weren't appreciably a lot more votes for Trump. There were some. What really happened is a lot of people stayed home. They didn't vote.
Yeah, which I don't understand.
Clearly, whole books are going to be written on this. The Democratic Party is going to fight about this for many months and years to come. But clearly, Trump, whatever you think of him, had a message that resonated with big parts of the former Democratic base, more so than Kamala Harris did. It's just the way it is, and I think it is largely to do with money. People want economic security above all, and approaching them on the basis of racial identity has its limits.
A lot of countries are seeing incumbents being swept out of office. We've seen some upheaval in Germany. We've seen some upheaval in France. Is what happened, do you think, in our presidential election just solely an American phenomenon, or that same sort of, we need new ideas, we need new people. Whoever the current regime is, we're just voting them out because we want something new. How much of that is just the sort of feeling that seems to be international right now?
There has been a resurgence of populism, of working class, our country first nationalistic sentiment all over the world. I think some of that has to do with the disruption that was caused by the pandemic and the economic hurt it caused people. I think some of that is a disillusionment with globalization, which was kind of the mantra of much of the leadership of this country and people around the world for a few decades. The idea that, hey, we'll link all our economies together, and the people who are the most efficient will produce it, and this, and the people who are most efficient will produce that. And that resulted in the hollowing out of a lot of industries in a lot of countries. People aren't happy. In France, they weren't happy. The farmers weren't happy because they're having to compete with cheaper products around the globe. And in this country, it was industrial jobs, which ended up going to China and Mexico. And Trump talked about that very effectively. We'll see if this populist solution, which is to put up the barriers and to do it all at home, makes sense. We kind of tried that back.
I was just going to say, it's not like we haven't tried it before.
No, the Smoot-Hawley tariff, for those of you who aren't history fans, maybe you're movie fans, a phrase from Ferris Bueller, will recognize that one of the reasons why the Great Depression was as bad as it was is everybody shut off their borders and they started producing everything in their own country, even if they weren't very good at it, which means it costs more. But the fans of global production and linking things together haven't done a very good sales job for why that's the way to go. And a lot of people in middle class and lower middle class industrial service economy folks just have kind of had enough of it and say, screw that. I'm not happy, and if Trump goes in and blows it all up, so what? I'm not getting anything now.
That seems to be the burn it all down, seems to be the sentiment, or at least I don't care if he burns it all down, which seems to me short-sighted. And I'm so tired of seeing these interviews with people who are not citizens saying, oh, he's not going to deport me. He's only going to go after the bad immigrants. God, I hope that some of this turns out the way they think, but I don't have as much faith as they do. How much faith do you have going forward?
One of the glories of democracy is that Trump and the Republicans now have all the rings of power in Washington. They have a majority in the Senate, they have a majority in the House, and they have the White House. So we're going to see what they're going to do, and we're going to see how it affects people. If they do what they usually do, they'll take care of rich people first, and everybody else will get peanuts, and maybe everybody else will be smart enough to figure that out. But we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we will, Greg Hines. Yes, we will. Thank you. It's been too long since we spoke. Thanks for joining me today.
Anytime, Joe.
We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
What's going on in Arizona? I know when you woke up this morning, that is probably the first or second thing that you thought to yourself, what's going on in Arizona? Where's Kyrsten Sinema? You know, what is Ruben Gallego doing? Well, we're going to get some answers now because once again, we are welcoming back Cameron Stevenson, who's the founding editor and chief political correspondent at the Copper Courier, which is the Arizona arm of the Courier newsrooms. Cameron, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to answering all those burning questions everyone has about Arizona. But I think I know what your first one is.
Yes? What do you think it is?
And that's, well, it might have something to do with the weather.
I was going to try really hard not to do that today. but since you brought it up.
Well, I think what we're experiencing now here is what you'd probably call a Chicago summer. It's fairly warm. It's in the 70s right now, and it finally feels great to be outside.
Yeah, the other day, we had a little bit of an Arctic blast, and yesterday my partner Ray was like, "Oh my God, it's so warm! It's 50." And that's kind of our attitude. It's like, oh, my God, it's 50. I got to get rid of it. I actually had to take my coat off. I went to run some errands like over at Target, and I was like, man, I'm sweating. What's going on? Oh, my God, it's 50. What am I doing wearing this wool coat?
Oh, I could not imagine.
Okay, let's talk a little bit of politics. How is Mr. Gallego?
Representative Gallego, he seems to be very happily preparing for his transition from the U.S. House to the Senate. He is one of the few here in Arizona one of the few Democrats anyway, who had a successful election night. He's been answering a lot of people's burning questions on why he won here and people like Kamala Harris did not. And other than that, I think he's just finishing out his term in the House and getting ready for a nice 6 years on the other side of the Congress.
And what's happening with Kyrsten Sinema?
Honestly, your guess is probably about as good as mine. We haven't heard much from her, honestly, since she said she wasn't going to run for re-election. She's in Congress occasionally. I know she's been out of town, as in out of the country a few times. I don't know what she's planning next, but I think it's whatever it's going to be. It's I couldn't even guess. I can't even make something up.
Yeah. Well, because she seems to have, I know she had a lot of corporate sponsors, so maybe they feel that they can still work with her or do something with her. But she seemed to burn bridges on both sides of the aisle, which is a very,
Yeah, it's a lot of interesting choices on her part for someone who.
Paul? Did we lose Cameron? I don't hear him. Do you hear him, Paul? Okay.
And how, saying, because I protected the filibuster, it's going to protect legislation that would otherwise be overturned. Whether or not that's the case is unknowable because we still have the filibuster, but that's kind of where she's at, is just touting her bipartisanship for the sake of bipartisanship off into the sunset.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say I wish her well, but I don't think that I can muster up that much positive energy for her. I hope that whatever happens, it's something that satisfies her. That's about as good as I can get, because I think that she was just such a disappointment in so many ways. So let's talk about some of your recent reporting in the Copper Courier. I know that you did something on something that we're trying to do here in Illinois. We're trying to Trump-proof our state, and you've got an attorney general that's trying to do that too. How is Chris Mays doing that?
Yeah, so it's Chris Mays is a really impressive figure. She's our Attorney General. She was a Republican until 2017 when Trump was separating families and putting children in cages at the border. And since then, she has been a very vocal anti-Trump, pro-democracy, pro-consumer, pro-working class type of politician. So a lot of the things that she did in relation to like consumer protections, like she's in the middle of a lawsuit against this large conspiracy of landlords to get together in secret and price set rent through algorithms. So instead of a competitive market,
is that the group of landlords that's accused of using certain software?
Yes. It's through this software tech company called RealPage. Now, RealPage was operating in several places throughout the country, and other states have joined into they had previously joined into a federal investigation against RealPage. Chris Mays opted not to do that. She decided to keep hers at state level, specifically because she didn't know who would be the next president and whether or not, Matt Gaetz or whoever becomes Department of Justice head would continue such a lawsuit. So she kept her stuff at the state level. As far as the rent price fixing, as well as her fake electors case, she cooperated a little bit with federal investigators, but kept that at the state level. So even if Donald Trump decides to pardon people involved with the January 6th insurrection, her case here in Arizona will continue to go forward. She made sure that he would not be able to shut that down directly.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is going to happen with ICE and the Border Patrol? Arizona is one of the places where this sort of stuff comes to fruition. What do any feelings about that?
Yeah, I've got quite a few feelings about it. None of them good. Our current governor, she's a Democrat. She has really focused heavily on humanitarian aid and providing Border Patrol with the proper resources to process people, because that's been the biggest issue at the border is they haven't had resources to process the people coming through. So they have to have them wait. These are asylum seekers, people looking for refuge. That's been her approach. Donald Trump is more of a xenophobic approach of round them up and ship them out. He wants to do mass deportations. Whether or not our governor will aid in that is somewhat unclear. I don't think she would, but other states have been very eager in the past to send their National Guard troops to our border. I believe Kristi Noem has done that. I want to say Ron DeSantis has done that. And so even if Arizona doesn't involve itself directly, I foresee a larger military presence here, not just at the border, but likely throughout the state. And that also has to do with a recent racial profiling law that was passed here in Arizona.
Tell us about that.
So that is a law that essentially gives police, all law enforcement, first of all, deputizes law enforcement here to act as Border Patrol agents. And then it gives them the authority to issue warrantless arrests. So they can arrest people, anyone they suspect is in the country unlawfully. The only way that that's happened in the past is through racial profiling. We saw this in 2010 to 2012 with Sheriff Joe Arpaio, where his department would racially profile people, go to largely Latino neighborhoods, arrest people who are citizens, immigrants, both here legal and undocumented, and throw them in prison. He was convicted of that. He was pardoned, but this new law essentially opens the door for that to happen again here.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was a ballot measure. The same people who voted to preserve abortion rights or restore abortion rights in Arizona are the same ones who voted to crack down on people in that way.
And do you think people understood completely that that was what they were voting for? Because, a lot of times I think, people don't realize how what they're voting for is actually going to play out in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there, of course, were some that were aware. I think a lot of people weren't. This ballot proposition was kind of heralded by Republicans as a fentanyl bill, something to crack down on fentanyl coming into the country. However, citizens are the ones who bring fentanyl into the U.S., not undocumented immigrants. Drug cartels, as vicious and corrupt as they are, they're still a business, and they're not going to waste their resources, putting product with people who are likely to get arrested. And so people were under the impression that this would reduce fentanyl trafficking. Statistically, that's just not going to happen.
Cameron, we need to take a break. I'm talking to the Copper Courier founding editor and chief political correspondent, Cameron Stevenson. We will be right back.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Cameron Stevenson is the founding editor and chief political correspondent at the Copper Courier. That's all the news in Arizona. And Cameron, we were making reference to the ballot measure on abortion that was voted on in this last election. I know you've written about that. You wrote about the ballot measure and also what Chris Mays is going to do with the 15-week ban that is on the books. Explain exactly what's going on with that.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating byproduct of this constitutional amendment. So Arizona voters, they passed the constitutional amendment that restores the right to abortion access. It doesn't set a number of weeks to the point of viability and leaves the discretion up to the doctor and their patient, just like any other type of health care. Since it's an amendment to the Constitution, it means that any law that goes against our state constitution is unconstitutional. But that doesn't mean that those laws automatically go away. So the most recent and most prominent example is we had a 15-week abortion ban passed in 2022. That is now unconstitutional, but it's still on the books. And so organizations, in order for it to formally be taken off the books, it had to be a lawsuit had to be filed, and someone had to claim that they're being harmed by this law and that it violates our state constitution. So Chris Mays is in support of this type of lawsuit, and she and others are also working on removing a bunch of other anti-abortion laws that were passed over the past several decades. I'm sure this might be the case in Illinois, definitely the case in other more conservative states, but ever since Roe v. Wade was instated, Republicans found different ways to chip away at abortion rights until it was overturned. Mm-hmm. And so now we have this hodgepodge of small laws that make it more difficult to receive abortion-related health care in different ways. And so now those are all unconstitutional in Arizona. And so we're going to see a bunch of lawsuits to remove these ones kind of piece by piece.
So does the average person living in Arizona even understand what the law is right now?
They understand the Cliff Notes, which is that we have a constitutional right to abortion care. All these other things, it's going to take a while for that to trickle down and percolate into everybody's knowledge. And a lot of it's going to be on not a need-to-know basis, but there's certain parts of these laws that will need to be repealed that people won't realize aren't the law until they're in that situation, if that makes sense.
It's really confusing.
It is. It's been confusing here for a while. The best example I can think of is that we have a 24-hour wait period law where any patient who is recommended abortion health care, whether it's medication or a procedure, after they're recommended that by their doctor, they still have to wait for 24 hours.
Does that same waiting period come into play if a man wants a vasectomy? Does he have to wait for 24 hours?
I don't know if you have to wait 24 minutes. They can just walk right in. And so that's another one that's going to be challenged and will probably get reversed because it is restricting women's right to that, abortion-related health care. It'll take some time. A lot of people won't realize a lot of people don't realize that that's the law right now until they are denied immediate care. But that's hopefully something that will be going away soon.
Yeah. The way I understand the laws that have been passed and are on the books, it doesn't seem like Arizona will be providing us the anecdotal cases that we seem to be getting out of Texas of women who can't get the care they need and end up dying because they can't get a D&C. Would you say that it looks like that's the case? That's an accurate interpretation of where things are in Arizona?
Yes, because we added it to our Constitution, we are in a much clearer, safer, more direct, place and position than places like Texas or places in other states where they have abortion protections in the law, but it's not part of the Constitution. Because we put that in our Constitution, that supersedes any law that's on the books, anything that was passed that restricts abortion access. Women here now have that right and that freedom, and if anyone's in a tough spot in Texas, they're more than welcome to come out here.
Really? That's interesting. I know that a lot of people, despite your outrageous heat, that a lot of people still look, I'm sorry, I'm just calling it like I see it, Cameron. People still think Arizona is a great place to go once you're not working full time anymore. Are you guys still picking up population?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think we will always have our retired communities. We're actually a lot like Florida. I don't know if you've heard of. There's that community in Florida it's completely 55 plus. It's just in the news.
Like those Del Webb things,
so
and like you have Sun City and all that.
Yes, yeah. We have Sun City, places like that that'll always. I think retirees will always be attracted to these areas. We also have a pretty big and growing tech community here. There's a lot of tech industry and new companies that have either come out from California. It's been in the past decade, I would say. It's really blown up manufacturing anyway, since there were a few laws passed by the Biden administration and Congress that expanded our chips manufacturing and also expanded our ability to manufacture electric vehicles and batteries. And so we're seeing both, tech and manufacturing have grown a lot here.
Wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that people are a little concerned about. Because
you might actually have younger people moving there, not people in my demographic.
I thought that was the same thing, Joan.
Oh, yes, Cameron, I love you. I love you.
But yeah, we run the gamut. We have people of all ages coming out here, and we're hoping that they stay. One of the main concerns is education. Unfortunately, Arizona is consistently bottom of the pack as far as quality of education goes. And so that is when people come here, oftentimes it's temporary because once they have kids or their kids are starting to get into school age, they want to move somewhere where they can get a quality education.
Wow. Any talk in the state legislature about, putting in some effort in that particular area?
Yes, but it depends on your perspective of what that looks like.
Costs money.
Our legislature. Yes. Well, money is part of it, but another part of it is where that money's going. Our education department is severely underfunded, especially with the influx of students that it's been having. But another big problem is that we allow people to use public school dollars to pay for private tuition. That was a bill or a law passed a few years ago. School vouchers is universal here. And so people are taking public school dollars and using them for private school for their students, which is kind of
that's very controversial here in Illinois. And the people who are in favor of it argue that it's just, it doesn't hurt public schools. It just gives families choices. And the argument from the public school folks is, of course, it hurts public schools because it takes away students and money that would otherwise go to us. How have you seen that play out in Arizona?
We've seen it be fairly detrimental for a lot of reasons. It does give parents more choices, but more options doesn't always mean best options. A lot of times these private or, for-profit schools are a lot smaller, a lot newer. A lot of them close after they get their voucher money. And oftentimes what we've seen here anyway is because the voucher only covers so much. Most of the people who are benefiting from them are families whose students were already in private school. And so it's not that they're choosing to go somewhere else. It's just that we are now subsidizing their private education. I see. And so that's, that is taking money away from public schools. Yeah, and the real problem with it is that there is no, in Arizona anyway, there's no oversight or accountability for this program. People are essentially able to get approved for these vouchers, which is $7,500 a year, and use them almost for whatever they want with no restrictions. There are parents who have used them for things like ski vacations for their kids. People have bought pianos for their homeschool students. They've bought what's it called, like parkour ninja classes as a form of PE. And these are all very specific expenses. But you would think even buying a piano, if you purchase that for one homeschool student, that doesn't go as far as purchasing it for an entire elementary school or an entire high school. And so it's really just abusing these funds, and there's no oversight or limit. There's no cap on how much money can be taken out of our education fund for vouchers, and the state legislature here has refused to put any oversight. And so not only are people abusing it and using it for things that they probably shouldn't, but there's also been several cases of fraud where people have taken hundreds of thousands of dollars and just used them for their personal living expenses. Any move to make the system a little fairer? Not that we'll see. The Republicans who will control the legislature again in 2025 have been very, no negotiation, no compromise on any sort of oversight, regulation, or restrictions on these voucher funds. Democrats several times have introduced bills to at least put these voucher schools and voucher usage at the same level of scrutiny as public schools, because right now public schools have a lot more oversight, of course, than anyone using these vouchers. But even that has been rejected by the legislature here. Wow. What's one thing in 2025 that you're most looking forward to, Cameron? Oh boy. Well, one thing this is a little out of left field, I suppose, but one thing I'm really looking forward to is something our Attorney General has teased but has not formally done anything yet. I spoke with her a few weeks ago about our groundwater issues. Right now, just the very shortened version of this is we have a lot of foreign-owned farms in rural parts of Arizona, and they have set up these massive systems to extract groundwater because in Arizona, we don't have any restrictions on how much groundwater can be taken. So what's happening is they're taking all this water. Local farms aren't able to access it. Their wells aren't deep enough anymore, and it's starting to drain all of our water reservoir, all of our supply. And
this is what happens when you ask a reporter nerd a question like this. You get something so in the weeds and so specific. This is why I love you, Cameron. We're out of time. As a matter of fact, I'm starting to run into the next show. So thank you, Cameron. It's a pleasure. We will talk more in the future. That's it for me. Driving it home with Patty Vasquez is next. Have a great evening, my friends. Good night.